Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle. Today we have with us Matt Miller, who is the founder and president of Spirit Vending. Welcome to the program, Matt.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me on, man.
Hey, you're welcome. So give us a little bit of your background and what led you through your entrepreneurial journey, and then what led you to Spirit Vending.
I went to college just up the road from you in Colorado Springs at the Air Force Academy, and was blessed to have an opportunity to be an Air Force pilot after graduating back in 1989. I flew in the Air Force for 9 years. And once my commitment was up to Uncle Sam, I decided I wanted to give the corporate world a try, and so jumped off. Most of my peers went on to be pilots for the airlines, but I had kind of been there, done that, and was ready to do something else. And so I worked in the hospital medical device industry for about a year and a half, and then transitioned over to the advertising space, where I worked for about a decade. And along the way, it did really, really well, especially in the advertising world. But along the way, I realized that publicly traded companies, the rules were always changing, and they never seemed to be in the favor of the employee. And there was a lot of decisions that were made along the way that my family was forced just to react to because we had no say. And got to a point financially because of some decisions that were made to where we were in a deep, deep hole. And I knew I needed to do something on the outside because the comp plan, just reading through it, I knew there was no way I was going to be able to, get caught up, no matter how big my book of business was. So initially I was doing whatever I had to do. I collected aluminum cans. I sold used books online for a while on Amazon and Libris and Half.com. And made some really good money doing that stuff. But I had read Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, previously, and I bought into his whole concept of passive income. And so I was always looking for something and comparing what I was doing to what he talked about in that book. And anyway, I had a good friend from church one Sunday mention that he and his daughters had bought a couple of gumball machines, and that was something they could do together, and they were making some money in local businesses. And I remember that conversation, and I was like, wow, maybe I could do this vending thing too. And so started off with a first machine was a used candy and gumball machine. I think it was like $36 on eBay from a guy across Houston where we lived at the time. And that's kind of where the journey started on the vending side of things.
So it really was not a chance encounter, but it was something that stuck in your mind from someone that had mentioned to you what they did, and then it kind of just rattled around and brought you full circle, and then you just explored that. And it could be anything passive. It could be a lot of different things, but that was something from a personal relationship that you did. Now, buying something from eBay, to me, sounds like you just bootstrapped it and did it on your own, and you didn't kind of go the route of, here's a franchise opportunity, we're going to tell you the rails and the ropes and the tips and tricks, and you just follow our lead. So you kind of have to figure things out on your own, right?
Yeah, I had no money. I literally had $100 to put this thing together. So our credit rating was terrible at the time. I couldn't have borrowed money. We didn't do the rental route that Kiyosaki talks about with real estate because I couldn't even afford my own house, let alone a rental property. So gumballs was the way that I could begin to put some passive income together. And then slowly but surely, as I was able to cash flow this thing, add equipment at whatever pace that I was able to do so. Made a lot of mistakes along the way, had to figure a lot of it out. Thankfully found a Yahoo group that I was able to be a part of where I learned a bunch from over a period of a year or so. But otherwise, it was just getting out and making a bunch of mistakes and failing a bunch, and over time figuring out what worked, what didn't work, et cetera.
So it's curious. I think that I've seen a statistic really recently where these days, now whatever the time frame that is, but in this age that we're in, it is so common for people to have multiple income opportunities. You know, you work a corporate job and you work weekends at fill in the blank or something, right? So you're describing that, and that sounds really good, but I want to figure out what you were doing during that time when you were just getting started, because now you were in a sales opportunity that the commissions had changed, and you're struggling in a territory, and you're also trying to get this going. So what was that like with a work-life balance where you kind of had that little, you know, it wasn't even a fire in the belly yet. It was like a spark, but you kind of were trying to fan it. So what was that like? Because I think a lot of people would worry, well, this is my, you know, safety net. I'm getting my hourly or my commission or my salary. Here's my corporate job. And I don't know that I can just stop one and do the other. It's going to take too long. But for a while, you've got to do both.
Yeah, I ended up continuing to work that job for another 4.5 years, and I did vending on the side on nights and weekends. There was a period of time there once we started working with schools, and the whole school Spirit Vending idea came to the forefront, where I was actually delivering pizzas at Pizza Hut at night on top of working full-time, on top of building my traditional route, et cetera. I was burning the candle at both ends for sure, but we had some goals, and especially knowing where I came from and what I had accomplished in my military career, you know, it wasn't me, it was my situations. And I could either feel sorry for myself and, you know, curl up into the fetal position, or could just get busy knowing that if I stayed busy long enough, I could work my way out of that. My wife was very much more on the details and of course stressed out about the now. Me, I was able to focus beyond that to see, okay, if I keep doing this a little bit every day, that in, you know, 2, 3, 4 years from now, we can get out of this debt, you know, and potentially I can own my life completely as a full-time entrepreneur. And it wasn't easy, but we stayed with it, and we didn't do something stupid like quitting my job and then hoping that the business was going to work out, because I had too much responsibility. And here's the thing, that year when my quota was significantly increased and I went from being a hero to a zero, that was only a year. And then that quota rolled off, and then my quota was reset at a reasonable level. So I just needed to weather the storm for that year at work and continue to prove my worth. And then when I ended up leaving 6 years ago, you know, my boss actually asked me, hey, do you just want to take a sabbatical for a while? It's just like a midlife crisis type thing, take a little time off, because I was a top performer in the office and had always been, and was an asset to him and to the team and to the clients that I worked with.
You know, that's a really good perspective too. And I think that sometimes, let's say that someone is an entrepreneur now, you might hit that rough patch, but I forget, what was the Tom Cruise movie where it's about race cars, and he would get like anxiety when he's getting ready to go through the smoke when there's a wreck in front of him, and then they were teaching him just plow through it because you just got to get through it. And like you said, it was just a patch. And so many times you come through it, and then, you know, the air clears and the view clears up, and maybe you learned a thing or two. But the point is, if we, you know, crumble and fall at every little hiccup along the way, you know, you're never going to make it past the cul-de-sac outside of your house. So that's a really powerful mindset. And unfortunately, people can't just learn it in a book or a program and check it off your checklist and go, okay, well, I've got that. You've got to live it and experience it and kind of, you know, get calloused by it, right?
Yeah, my coach, a guy by the name of Aaron Walker, calls it grit. He says, you know, you've got to have grit. You got to be willing to just buckle down and do what you got to do, knowing that, you know, most of this can be temporary if you want it to, and if you're willing to work hard enough, long enough to make it happen.
Yeah, so I'm sure that you believe in and follow business systems to build, grow, scale, you know, on the business side, entrepreneur side of things, life, things like that. But wasn't there a time when you didn't even know what a business system was or a life system was? And what was the point where it kind of started to clarify for you, and then you started to realize, hey, this worked because I did these things, so let me piece these next pieces together, and that's now become my own system. Because rarely can a coach, like you mentioned, say, here's my system, cookie cutter it to you, and now you're good to go. You've got to take nuances from things and make them your own. Is that what you've seen in your experience?
Yeah, I see. As a pilot, we live by the checklist. And, you need a checklist to follow to fly an airplane because they're very, very complex systems. And so I applied that use of checklists to the business, not really realizing it at the time, but essentially those checklists were systems that I had put in place. And initially it was just me. So, there were just small things that I did to keep my life easier. But then I started having others reach out to me and say, hey, I want to do what you do. And they kept coming. And I realized, okay, I have got to put some things in place so that I can scale this and continue to serve the people who have interest in being part of what we're doing. And so that is what ultimately led to a lot of the systems that we have in place today, is just the fact that, to give you an idea, we've grown 62 franchisees in the last 13 months or so. How do we do that? I literally, my office is off of my house. I've got myself as a full-time employee. I've got a bunch of contractors that do a variety of things. But how have we been able to grow? It's because we've had those systems in place.
What would you say to someone that doesn't have a system and they know they need a system? Where do you start? How do you start creating one of your own?
It's just sitting down and thinking through the process. Okay, if I want to do this, what are the steps that have to occur in order to get that same outcome time after time after time? And then you start writing them down. Step A is I do this. Step B is this. Step C, etc. I really was able to start to really hone those systems. There's a guy by the name of Scott Beebe. He's got a company called Business on Purpose, and I hired him as a coach to help me with vision, mission, values, and systems. And for 4 months, an hour and a half a week, we would get together and we would just kind of work through this stuff. I'll be honest with you, I'm not wired that way. I always joke with Scott that time with him made my head hurt. But that's his wheelhouse. So he was able to help me by me explaining what needed to happen or how it needed to happen. He was able to help me solidify those systems and put a framework in place that is now foundational for all that we do today and moving forward for years to come.
Yeah, I think that the big important thing is, like, when you think about sales and you think of sales scripts, I think people cringe when they hear that, and I think that sales scripts are confining, but you need to have a script that you are familiar with so that you can make it your own. So a system and a checklist is necessary, and you can have foundational systems and checklists, but then you need to tweak this one for yourself and this for your situation, but the bones are there. And I really like, I think it's really interesting. Someone probably has done a study or written a book on ex-military people that come out and are super productive in business just because of the foundation and the mindset and the grit and the checklist. And I remember reading a book years ago called Flawless Execution from fighter pilots that talk about the pre-flight and the checklist and the post-flight and what we learned and didn't. And I think that there's so many basic business principles. So here's a question. When you mention growing and scaling up, and I think that some people get frustrated hearing that because it's like, I'm trying to put two nickels together to get off the ground, and you're talking about scaling up and growing and handling growth. At what point did you start realizing, the momentum is rolling well, and if it keeps going this way, I need to get help and team and support and scaling up? Because your franchise numbers in the short time frame, that's pretty impressive, but I'm sure that wasn't something that was, overnight.
No, and it wasn't, to be honest, something that I could have forecast either or predicted. We've just been blessed. I probably should have invested more in some of this stuff earlier on, but I was doing what I could and what I felt best to do at the time. And here's what I've learned over the years, Mike, is there are very few mistakes you can make that are permanent in business. So you got to be willing to roll with it. In fact, I was just talking to one of the guys on my team before we hopped on, and he's putting some stuff together for the team and this and that. And he's wired more as a perfectionist. And I just said, hey, listen, dude, let's get the minimum viable product up in the next week. You've got all the knowledge and the information. You just got to take a few hours to do it. And then you can improve on it and add and make adjustments as you go. It's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be changes that need to be made along the way. And, we got to figure out what is good enough to launch and then build on it from there. And that's what I've been able to do and been willing to do. I haven't had all the answers, but I've been willing to move forward. And by moving forward, eventually we figure it out. When we started School Spirit Vending, I thought we were going to be working with high school kids and mascots and temporary tattoos for football and basketball games and that type of thing. I could have never in my wildest dreams thought that I'd be working with the younger kids, but the high school kids didn't get it. They were too cool for our stuff, but the younger kids absolutely loved it, and we pivoted. But if I had never started and just kept thinking about it, I would have never learned that in the marketplace and made that adjustment that has changed everything for us in the years.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You mentioned a couple interesting things. I'm sure you've read Eric Ries, the Lean Startup, because you mentioned MVP, minimum viable product, and pivot. And I think that those are things that have always been there, but someone put a label on it, right? I mean, people were always starting off and then learning as you go and improving as you go, and then someone just called it, minimum viable product. But that's an approach that is so critical because too many people want it right before you launch it, and maybe the time it takes you to get it right in your own mind, the train's left the station, and maybe you still get a little bit of the benefit, but maybe the market has moved because you took so long to get it right. And so I think that's a huge piece. And then pivot, it's not like quitting. You didn't quit the business. You just noticed that high school students weren't embracing the vision as much as you thought they were, but yet, hey, look at the younger ones, and now all of a sudden you're diving deep there. So what are your thoughts on being aware in your own business to notice things where you need to kind of maybe shift and pivot, or maybe having that idea or new project be that minimum viable product and just get it going and then improve as you go?
Well, just to kind of piggyback on what you said, Mike, the other challenge, if you wait, is the fact that you might take all this time to put a product or whatever together to find out that the market doesn't really want it, versus putting the minimal viable product together and then adjusting. And if the market wants it, then putting the time and effort into it later. You never know unless you get out there. And I've read multiple books, from folks that do programs on the web and courses and all that, to where in many cases they're pre-selling them with a launch date of X, and they haven't put anything together except for a landing page or whatever, because they're trying to find out if people want it and are willing to pay for it first before they take all the time and effort to put it together. They can always refund people their money or change course later. But, you got to stop getting ready to get ready and just go do it, and you'll figure it out as you go.
Yeah, that's a super good point. Is sometimes and we don't. I think another thing that people don't recognize enough is the shiny object syndrome. And in your business, you can come up with all kinds of, hey, if it works here, maybe it'll work in this vertical, or I'm going to try, and you get distracted. So I think you need to have a internal plan or system in place where, you take those ideas and put them on the, in the parking lot, and maybe have a file or a folder or a notebook or a Evernote or something where you go, hey, that's a good idea for next quarter. I'm going to start thinking toward that, but right now I've got to finish this project, and I think that helps keep us on task as well. So Here, let's wrap up with how can people learn more. If someone is interested in creating some passive side income, kind of as you call it, in between the cracks of life, what's the best way they can learn more?
We've done I wrote a short ebook called Live Your Dreams, the Top 10 Reasons Why You Need to Own a Vending Business. And if it's all right with you, Mike, I'd love to give anybody in your audience interested a copy. They can go to ssvbusiness.com/IE for influential entrepreneurs and download that for free and find out at least a little bit more about, vending and how it could potentially be a side income for them in some way, shape, or form. And then if they want to talk more specifically about what we do with schools, helping them raise money on the franchise side, we can start that dialogue too if they like.
Excellent. Well, I will make sure to have that website in the show notes, and that's very generous of you. And thank you for taking your time. I think we learned some really good business lessons that we've heard of, but presented in a fresh new way. So, Matt, thank you so much for taking your time today.
Thank you, Mike. God bless you.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneurssradio.com.